So did you know, guys, that on the very least 5 nations could actually receive the F-18 or a version of the F-18 in the game? Maybe even 6? Well, let's talk a little bit about them and what variants should eventually come, or at least, you know, on the very least, the options that each nation has on adding these beloved aircraft for each of these nations. Okay, so we start off with the US. Obviously, the US is the main operator, so they can use the most amount of versions. They can use the initial F-18A and B, which are the initial ones. Of course, these would carry Sparrows, A9Ls, eventually A9Ms, and, you know, better versions of the Sparrow and stuff. You would use the old APG-65, just a very initial, very early 80s version of the F-18. But they can also use the F-18A Plus and B Plus, which are obviously, just a reminder to you guys, the A is the single-seater, the B is the twin-seater, the two-seater, right? But yeah, the Plus variants, they can actually use the better radars of the C model, so the APG-73, they have multiple upgrades done to the aircraft, and basically the idea here is that it's the same aircraft as the F-18A, but with avionics, radars, and weapons from the sea. That's the major idea, okay? Also, obviously, the F-18C and D, so the single-seater and the twin-seater, the double-seater version, which is basically a very late 80s version out of it. You would carry the M120s, use the APG-73. Like I said, the Plus A and B could actually carry these avionics and missiles and radars and everything. But yeah, this would be the version that it's actually upgraded. It has slightly more powerful engines. It's just overall a better aircraft, okay? And then, of course, we have the Super Hornet as well, which is the F-18E, and the F-18F, which is the twin-seater, right? Both of these would have a complete redesign of the aircraft, much larger aircraft, but at the same time much smaller RCS on radar. It has initially the APG-73, but later it got the APG-79I as a radar. It can carry an enormous amount of missiles. Later models of the M120 and AIM-9s, even AIM-9Xs, M120Cs, you can carry basically everything that the US can have, and it's a proper 4+ generation jet. Okay, so the US, these are all the options. They can have literally every single version of the F-18. So the AB, the A+, and B+, the C, the D, the E, and the F. Okay, then we go for the second nation, the Germans. The Germans, since they are adding the Swiss Air Force to that tech tree, with the Hunter and other aircraft that will come like that, the 16 and stuff, that will come or are already there from the Swiss, you can expect on the very least one of these aircraft. And the Swiss actually used the C model and D model, so we could actually have the Germans receiving one of these models, probably the C, right? But yeah, it would carry all the things that we already talked about with the C and D models. There are slight upgrades here and there, but the general idea it is that it is an F-18 Legacy Hornet, that it's the latest model out of it, okay? The USSR never used anything like that, obviously, so I really doubt that we will see any F-18s there. But the UK can receive multiple F-18s as well. It can be actually the second largest in options to be added for the F-18. So we start off with the Canadians F-18s, so the CF-18A and CF-18B, of course the single and twin seat. And of course this is basically a Canadian built version of the F-18. It can be upgraded, of course. It can have better radars and better stuff, APG-73s and everything, so it can be upgraded, but a general sense is that it's an earlier model of the F-18 that can be upgraded later, okay? And of course the Australians, they actually use that as well. It can be added for the UK as well, with the F-18A and B as well, but also with the option of the F-18F Super Hornet. So they only use the double seat, you know, only the two-seater. But yeah, it can be added, and it would be in the game the only nation to have a Super Hornet that it's not the US if it's added. So yeah, the F-18F could be added for the UK, and it would be cool to have the double-seater there, just to have another variant of the Super Hornet and a different flavor to the Super Hornet from what we probably will have from the single-seater for the US, right? So the UK has a lot of options. China, France, and Israel, of course, they probably will never see an F-18, so we're gonna just keep those three nations. But then we go for Italy. Italy can actually receive the Spanish F-18A+, or the F-18B+. So they actually use both the variants, of course, the upgraded ones from the A and B. And why is that? Well, like the Spanish kind of stuff is normally added for the Italians. Normally stuff that it's already Italian, you know, even Portuguese stuff and other nation stuff. Normally stuff that it's already linked with Italian development, even the Brazilian AMX, you know. So normally that would be kind of the case. So it is kind of a stretch to have a Spanish F-18 on the Italian tech tree, but if there is something of an F-18 that can be added for the Italians, it would be the Spanish one. So it's kind of a stretch. I don't know if you were gonna ever see this, but it could be added there if they decide to, okay? And then Sweden. Sweden obviously can have, since he has as a subtree, the Finnish F-18C and D models. So both these versions could be upgraded and everything, but yeah, it would be probably the last aircraft we see for a while for that subtree below the MiG-21Bs, and of course below, you know, or before, if you will, the F-35 is added there, right? Because the last aircraft that can be added there in that subtree would be the F-35 eventually, right? But probably will take a while for us to see an F-35. So the F-18, probably the C model would be added there, and it would be very cool to have the Swedish there. So these are the ones that are most likely ones, especially the US, the UK, and the Germans, and of course the Swedish. The Italians is a little bit of a stretch. And then we have the last nation that it's a very big stretch. This is like half the world kind of stretch, okay? The Japanese can actually receive an F-18 if they decide to add more Asian nations to that tech tree, because there is a particular nation that has 8 F-18D models, and it's the Malaysians. So I kind of doubt that we will see that, but if they decide to add more, you know, Asian nations there for Japan, to have more options for that tech tree, and of course to include more nations there in general, the Malaysians could be added for the Japanese with the F-18D. But again, it's a very, very big stretch, and I don't think it's ever going to happen. But it could, in theory, be something that they like, okay? Like I said, the most likely ones, obviously, the US, Germany, the UK, and Sweden. Italian, kind of a stretch, and Japanese, a big stretch. But basically, this is it. These are technically 6 nations that could, in theory, receive at least one version of an F-18 Hornet. Let me know in the comments what you think about this list, if I miss anything, if you would like to see these nations receiving Hornets, and I see you guys on the next one. So make sure to subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, and bye.